32 years after True Lies exploded onto screens, the cast's lives have taken strikingly different paths, some thriving, some gone too soon. Let's take a closer, honest look at where they are now and what time has truly changed. Arnold Schwarzenegger was born on July 30th, 1947. He played Harry Tasker in True Lies, a character who lives a double life, appearing to be an ordinary husband while secretly working as a highly skilled intelligence agent. In 1994, at 46 years old, he was already firmly established as one of the defining action stars of his era. This role, however, added something different. It blended explosive action with humor and domestic tension, allowing audiences to see a more flexible side of his screen presence. By 2026 at 78, his life story extends far beyond cinema. His transition into politics, including his tenure as governor of California, followed by a return to entertainment and public speaking, reflects a trajectory that few actors ever achieve. That evolution didn't happen by accident. The credibility and global recognition he built through films like True Lies created opportunities that reached into entirely different fields. Looking back now, the film feels like a midpoint, capturing him at the height of physical dominance, while quietly setting the stage for a broader legacy. And that raises an interesting question. How many actors can successfully redefine themselves without losing the audience that first made them famous? If you're enjoying this kind of deeper, honest breakdown, take a moment to like the video and share your thoughts, because the next story shifts focus from global power to personal transformation in a way that feels just as compelling. Jamie Lee Curtis was born on November 22, 1958. She portrayed Helen Tasker, a character whose journey in True Lies is built on gradual revelation. At first, she appears to be living a routine, somewhat overlooked life, but as the story unfolds, her character steps into situations that demand courage, adaptability, and emotional strength. In 1994, at 35 years old, Curtis was already known in Hollywood, but this role allowed her to expand how audiences perceived her. Instead of being confined to earlier genre expectations, she demonstrated range, moving between vulnerability and confidence with precision. By 2026 at 77, her career reflects the long-term impact of that shift. She didn't rely on repeating past successes. Instead, she chose roles that aligned with where she was in life, which helped her maintain credibility over decades. The cause and effect relationship here is subtle but important. By embracing change early, she avoided being limited later. Revisiting her performance in True Lies, it becomes clear that the film wasn't just another credit. It was a turning point that reshaped her trajectory. And that makes her story resonate differently today, especially when compared to others who struggled to adapt. If her journey stands out to you, don't forget to subscribe and stay engaged, because the next actor's path shows what happens when momentum meets unpredictability. Tom Arnold was born on March 6, 1959. He played Albert Gibson, the partner who operates alongside Harry Tasker and brings a necessary contrast to the film's tone. While the central character represents control and precision, Albert often reacts in real time, adding humor but also a sense of realism that keeps the story grounded. In 1994, at 35 years old, this role positioned Arnold within a major studio production that significantly raised his profile. By 2026, at 77, his career reflects a more complex narrative. There were periods of visibility and success, but also moments where public attention shifted away from his work and toward his personal life. That shift changed how audiences engaged with him, illustrating how quickly perception can evolve in the entertainment industry. What makes his role in True Lies particularly interesting in hindsight is how essential it was to the film's balance. Without that contrast, the story might have leaned too heavily into spectacle. Instead, his presence created rhythm, allowing tension and humor to coexist. Over time, however, maintaining that position in Hollywood proved challenging, which highlights a broader reality. Not every breakthrough leads to sustained stability. His story adds another layer to the overall narrative of the cast, showing that success can take very different forms depending on timing, choices, and external factors. And as we move forward, the contrast becomes even sharper, because the next group includes both rising youth and unforgettable loss, stories that change the emotional tone of this journey in ways you might not expect. Tia Carrere was born on January 2, 1967. She played Juno Skinner, a character who brought both elegance and danger into the world of True Lies. In 1994, at 27 years old, she stood out not only because of her striking screen presence, but also because she represented a different kind of antagonist, one that relied as much on intelligence and composure as on physical threat. By 2026 at 59, her career reflects a steady evolution rather than a dramatic reinvention. She moved across film, television, and even voice acting, showing a versatility that often goes underappreciated when compared to more headline-driven careers. What makes her journey particularly interesting is the cause and effect dynamic between early exposure and long-term positioning. Her role in True Lies gave her international visibility, but instead of being locked into a single type of character, she diversified her work, which allowed her to maintain relevance over time. Looking back, Juno Skinner wasn't just a supporting villain, she was part of what gave the film its layered tension. And if you think about how different her trajectory feels compared to the earlier actors we've discussed, stay with the video and let me know in the comments, because the next story shifts towards someone who started from a completely different point in life. Eliza Dushku was born on December 30, 1980. She played Dana Tasker, the daughter caught between a seemingly ordinary family life and a hidden world of espionage. In 1994, she was just 13 years old, making her one of the youngest members of the cast. That starting point matters, because it shaped everything that followed. By 2026 at 45, her journey reflects what it means to grow up within the industry rather than enter it as an established adult. Early exposure brought opportunity, but it also came with expectations and pressures that are difficult to fully understand from the outside. Over time, she took on roles that allowed her to redefine herself beyond that early image, building a career that extended into television and other projects. The cause and effect relationship here is more complex. Early visibility created a foundation, but sustaining a career required deliberate choices about what to accept and what to leave behind. Revisiting her role in True Lies, it becomes clear that she wasn't just part of the background. She represented the next generation within the story itself, mirroring her real-life position in Hollywood. And that parallel adds depth when we look back today. If her transformation from child actor to established performer stands out to you, consider subscribing and staying through to the end, because the next story brings a completely different perspective, one that moves from growth to legacy. Bill Paxton was born on May 17, 1955. He played Simon, a character whose role introduced an unexpected layer of deception and humor into the narrative. In 1990, at 39 years old, Paxton was already a recognizable face, known for his ability to bring energy and unpredictability to every performance. That quality is exactly what made his role in True Lies memorable. His character operates on the edge of credibility, and yet it works because of how fully he commits to the performance. By 2026, however, his story carries a different tone. He passed away on February 25, 2017, at the age of 61, due to complications following heart surgery. That loss adds a layer of reflection when revisiting his work. The cause and effect here is not about career trajectory in the traditional sense, but about how a body of work becomes a lasting legacy. His performances remain, even as his presence is gone. In True Lies, his role might not have been the central focus, but it contributed significantly to the film's rhythm and unpredictability. Watching it today, there's an added awareness that moments like these cannot be recreated, and that realization changes how audiences engage with the film. If you remember his performance, share your thoughts below, because the next name on this list brings us back to a different kind of legacy, one defined by influence across generations. Art Malik was born on November 13, 1952. He portrayed Salim Abu Aziz, the primary antagonist whose actions drive much of the film's central conflict. In 1994, at 41 years old, Malik brought a composed and calculated presence to the role, avoiding exaggerated theatrics and instead focusing on a more controlled portrayal. That approach made his character feel grounded, which in turn heightened the tension of the story. By 2026, at 73, his career reflects consistency rather than constant visibility. He continued working across film and television, often taking on roles that required nuance rather than spectacle. The cause and effect dynamic here is subtle but important. By building a reputation for reliability and depth, he maintained a steady presence in the industry without needing to dominate headlines. Looking back at True Lies, his performance serves as a reminder that a strong antagonist does not always rely on excess. It often depends on restraint. And that restraint is part of what makes the film still engaging decades later. As we move toward the final segment, the contrast between quiet consistency and broader fame becomes even more apparent. And the last figures on this list will tie those themes together in a way that brings the entire story full circle. Grant Heslave was born on May 15, 1963. He appeared in True Lies in a smaller supporting role, one that many viewers might not immediately remember, but that still contributed to the film's overall structure. In 1994 at 30 years old, he was still in the early stages of his on-screen career, working within a system where visibility often depends on both timing and opportunity. By 2026 at 62, his trajectory reflects a significant shift, not away from the industry, but deeper into it. Rather than focusing solely on acting, he transitioned into producing and writing, eventually becoming closely associated with major film projects behind the scenes. This kind of transition highlights an important cause-and-effect pattern in Hollywood. Early acting experience can provide insight into storytelling, which later translates into creative control off-screen. In his case, that shift allowed him to build a different kind of legacy, one that may not always be visible to casual audiences, but carries substantial influence within the industry. Looking back at True Lies, his role becomes more meaningful in hindsight, not because of screen time, but because it marks an early point in a career that would evolve in a less obvious but highly impactful direction. And that raises an interesting question. How many familiar faces from classic films have gone on to shape the stories we watch today without us even realizing it? Charlton Heston was born on October 4, 1923. He appeared in True Lies as Spencer Trilby, a senior figure within the intelligence structure, representing authority and experience within the narrative. In 1994, at 60 years old, he was already a legendary figure in Hollywood, known for decades of influential performances that shaped the industry. By the time he took on this role, his presence carried a different kind of weight, not based on physical action but on reputation and history. By 2026, his story is viewed through the lens of legacy, as he passed away on April 5, 2008, at the age of 84. The cause-and-effect relationship in his career is long-term and cumulative. Years of iconic roles established him as a symbol of a certain era of filmmaking, and that identity carried into every later appearance, including True Lies. Even in a relatively brief role, his presence added credibility and a sense of continuity, linking the film to an earlier generation of Hollywood storytelling. Revisiting his performance today is less about the specifics of the character and more about recognizing the arc of a career that spanned decades. It also reminds us that films like True Lies are not isolated moments. They are intersections where different eras of talent come together. And as we approach the final name on this list, that idea of connection between generations becomes even more significant because the last actor brings everything back to where we started, but with a slightly different perspective. Looking back at True Lies, what stands out now isn't just the action or the spectacle, but the real human journeys behind each performance. Time reshaped every story in a different way. Some expanded, some quietly evolved, and some ended too soon. That contrast is what makes revisiting this cast meaningful today. If this reflection brought back memories or gave you a new perspective, take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. And tell me in the comments, which actor's journey surprised you the most and which story should we explore next?